Hi, I'm Diane, your host of Epic Conversations, and we're back again with Ken Davis. Ken has been telling us all kinds of important information about the U.S. Constitution. So you're in for a continuous treat here. And today, Ken, we're going to be talking about the laws of nature and nature's God.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there are certain laws, and you're going to share and tell us about that. And then when there reaches a point where God's law almost supersedes the natural.
Right.
So let's hear some example. I think you had one that we were talking off camera about.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and even the premise of laws of nature and nature's God, the founders used it. One of the most cited human sources of the Constitution and Declaration was Montesquieu. Montesquieu talked about in his book, Two Treatises of Law, about the laws of nature and nature's God.
Okay.
And so there's a handful of examples, but we'll talk about first the laws of nature. And what that means is there's things that occur in nature that we can apply to human law. And so if it's not found in nature, or if it's found in nature, then how do we apply it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so a great example is a horse, right? If a horse, let's say you've had a horse for 10 years, and you've developed a relationship with this horse.
Mm-hmm.
You and this horse are friends.
Yes.
But suddenly this horse now has foals. Okay.
A fall?
Foals.
A baby.
A baby.
A baby.
Yes.
Okay.
So the horse has a baby,
Mm-hmm.
and now you go into the horse stall to try and feed this horse that you've had this relationship for 10 years. You guys are good friends.
Yeah.
But the horse immediately goes into protection mode for their baby.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That occurs naturally.
And so they don't want me in the way.
That's right. The right to protect, the right of protection of self-defense,
Mm-hmm.
The right to protect your family, the right to protect your home kicks in. It's instinctive in nature.
And since God created us and God created nature, there's certain natural instincts that we have that He put in there for us.
Right. And so, and self-protection, protecting your home. So again, these are things that happen in nature, and we don't necessarily. So when you get the argument that I don't need to use the Bible, right? Well, we can say, okay, here's some things that happen in nature or don't happen in nature. So, for instance, in nature, you don't see another animal rip its young out of the womb. Doesn't happen in nature, right? So now we don't need God's law to step in and tell us not to do this, because in nature it's not done, right? And so you get animals. I love some animals that will urinate on a tree or an area. Now that becomes their territory. Right? So the right to have a home or a place to live, right? So we talk about property, the right to property in the Constitution, or even in the Declaration, right? The right to property, and that again comes out of natural law. So where we need then God's law is where natural law fails to be something applicable to humans. So, for instance, in nature, murder happens. Murder is natural.
Right, animals kill other animals to eat them, right?
That's right. And so now we need God's law to step in. Because in God's law, and we're talking primarily the Mosaic laws, God's law says, thou shalt not murder. Incest and rape does happen in nature. God's law says.
And God's law supersedes the natural law.
Correct. Because there are things found in nature that we don't apply to humans, but because God's law lays out the what thou shalt nots.
God knows better.
Absolutely, God knows better. And so, do you see in nature animals that, I don't know if do you have pets?
I have Tweety and
Do you have
Peppy
birds?
parakeets.
Okay. All right. Well, when you go, are they in the same cage?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
When you go to feed them, do you ever see where one is trying to eat more than the other and maybe prevent the other from eating or getting enough food?
Sometimes they get at each other.
Yeah, you see that a lot in nature, right? But God's law says thou shalt not covet, shalt not covet.
That's right. So I got to
Thou
tell
shalt not
Tweety,
steal.
let Peppy have her own share of food.
Yeah, right? You get children in a room
Mm-hmm.
with toys,
Oh.
right? And all of a sudden, a kid is sitting there playing with the toy,
Mm-hmm.
and another kid comes to take a different toy, and all of a sudden, this kid runs over. That's mine. Mine is a favorite word of little ones, right? Mine. Again, God's law, right? Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not covet. We need God's law as well as what we see in nature, but you don't have to always. I in our class I talk about. There are things you don't have to come at people with about thus saith the Lord, because naturally things occur that we then can say, listen, I don't have to tell you, here's what God says.
Mm-hmm.
It occurs naturally, and therefore I can use that as part of my argument as to why certain things should or should not be.
Can you give another example beside the kids? Because I could see, like, if I'm playing with this toy and you stop playing with your phone and I go over and say, hey, I want to play with this, but this is your property.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like if I took it and said, no, that's mine. It's not mine.
That's correct.
So it's like a instinctive that we need to know that that's not my property. This is, but this is mine. So if you come over and say, let me borrow your pen, well, you can borrow it, but I want it back. This is my pen,
Right.
or something like that. So I wanted to give that one. Another example, it was a simple one, but.
And it's a great simple example of the right to property. So in the Declaration we talked about the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now originally the pursuit of happiness specifically was referring to property. Okay. So again, we don't separate the Declaration from the Constitution. We take them together because many things that are answered or solved in the Constitution came straight out of issues or complaints that were grievances that came from the Declaration
of Independence.
And so the founders believed that you had a right to life. Right? What I just say, animals, there's nowhere found in nature that animals tear their young out of the womb.
Right.
And don't want to get into I don't find that to be a political debate, but a philosophical debate about abortion. Liberty. And so if there's anything that someone else does that infringes, now also remember that it says among these are life, liberty, and meaning it's not an exhaustive list. We don't stop at life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. But it's a great starting point. And anything that someone does to infringe upon those rights, that we should have the law there to stand as a preventative measure.
Okay. So can you have another example?
Well, let's see. I mean, there's
because when you said these, that life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, among these, I'm like, that could be inexhaustible.
Yeah. Well, let's take, for instance, in the state of Colorado. We'll use Colorado.
Okay.
There are many legislatures. In fact, I was just hearing a story recently, and I'm trying to remember who it was, but of them, a legislature saying the parents should not have a right to raise their child. The government, the state, knows best.
Now that goes against God's law, because God entrusted the child to the parent. the parent has the right to, I mean, they birthed the child. They should have their own way of raising their child in a God-fearing manner.
Well, where do you see it in nature? Where do you see where an elephant says to a lion, I know best how to raise your cub?
Good point.
It doesn't happen.
Right.
There's no godlike figure, because truthfully, that's what we're seeing with what I would call overreach from governments, is when they're telling you, we know best how to X, Y, or Z. You don't have the proper brain power, nor should you have the authority. A fine example, here we get to vote on a lot of things in our country. And there's a proposition that occurred in California. Again, hate to kind of rail on this one, but same-sex marriage had been actually voted on in California twice. It may have been a third time, but for sure twice. After the last time it was voted on, in which the people said, we don't want this, a judge, and I should have brought this up earlier, but a judge stepped in and said, the people don't know what they want. They're not smart enough, nor are they progressive enough to know what they want nor what they need. And so I will say, federal judge, I will tell the people that this should be lawful.
That was like overextension of the power of
It's an overreach.
judge.
And a judge doesn't even have the authority to do such a thing, but yet it happened in California. Just recently in Colorado, where we voted down, it was gun law. There was a gun law, I think it was the red flag. Yeah, I think it was the red flag law, and it was on our ballot. Well, people overwhelmingly voted it down. And so what we had a legislative branch that came in during their next session and passed it, where it was literally months. We voted in November, and by May, they had passed a bill overturning what the people had already said no to.
Now, doesn't that go against the Constitution? Doesn't that go against what we were originally talking about with the picture and then the prayer and Congress, and people are praying for this nation, and it's we the people, and then they're doing laws like this.
Yeah.
So we need to call our people, congressmen and senators.
Absolutely. And actually, I think I'm going to correct myself. It was the oil and gas bill that we had voted against it, and they pushed it through anyway. But yes, no, absolutely. It is an overreach. We need to be aware when an overreach occurs, and then we need to hold accountable those people that are acting outside of their authority, outside their boundaries.
Excellent. That's exactly right. Thank you. Thank you, Ken. And thank you for joining us. We have a couple more episodes with Ken coming up. And these are important decisions that we need to make. These are important information that we're receiving about the U.S. Constitution and how to vote and what our rights are. So thank you. And if you're enjoying these episodes, please subscribe to this channel. Follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter, and share it with a friend. Till next time, have an epic day in the Lord.